The first thing I saw was my father's name floating in the water. It had been ripped from one of the private property signs he installed before he died. The splintered board drifted beside my boat, face down in the tide. Then, I looked up and saw what had replaced it. An 8-foot sign stood at the entrance to my private island, painted coastal blue and stamped with the Harbor Crest HOA logo. Harbor Crest, Private Island Beach. Residents and guests welcome. Behind it, nearly 100 strangers were treating my land like a public resort. Children tore through the dunes. Music thundered from speakers tied to palm trees. Tourists drank beneath rented umbrellas while employees in Harbor Crest uniforms collected money for kayaks, paddleboards, and exclusive island access. They were charging $65 a person. To trespass on my property, I cut the engine, stepped into the shallows, and started recording. In 3 days, they had transformed the beach. My warning signs had been torn down. A temporary dock had been hammered into the shoreline. Lounge chairs covered the sand. Portable toilets had been installed beside the tree line, and a utility vehicle was dragging coolers directly through protected dune grass. Then, Grant Weller, the HOA's operations manager, marched toward me with 2 armed security guards. He did not ask who I was. He already knew. Grant pointed at me and told the guards, loud enough for the tourists to hear, "Remove her before she causes a scene." I held up my phone. "You're standing on my island." He laughed, not nervously, not awkwardly. He looked back at the crowd and laughed as though I had just claimed to own the ocean. Before I could say another word, HOA President Victoria Hale arrived on a pontoon boat carrying champagne, real estate agents, and a group of prospective buyers. She stepped onto my dock as if she owned that too. I handed her a certified copy of my deed. Victoria looked at the seal, looked at my name, and then looked straight into my camera. "What exactly do you expect me to do with this?" "Get everyone off my property." She smiled. Then she tore the first page in half. The beach went strangely quiet. Victoria dropped the pieces into the wet sand, pressed one beneath the heel of her white shoe, and told the guards to escort me back to my boat. According to her, the island had been abandoned. According to her, Harbor Crest had improved it. And according to her, once the residents had started using the beach, removing them would be bad for the community. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "You had years to do something with this place. We did it for you." That was when I noticed the orange survey tape beneath the utility vehicle. A small wooden stake had been snapped in half and crushed into the sand. I knew exactly what it marked. 6 days earlier, local wildlife volunteers had documented a loggerhead sea turtle nest in that spot. The area had been photographed, logged, and marked for protection. Now tire tracks ran directly across it. A folding table stood over part of the nesting zone, and one of the Harbor Crest employees was pushing a metal umbrella anchor into the sand less than 10 feet away. I stopped arguing. I photographed the broken marker, the tire tracks, the dock, the payment booth, the security guards, the torn deed beneath Victoria's shoe. Then I slowly turned the camera toward her. Victoria smiled and raised her champagne glass. She thought I was collecting proof for a property lawsuit. She had no idea what was buried beneath that sand. And she had no idea who had already been notified. I picked up the torn pieces of my deed, returned to my boat, and left without saying another word. Behind me, the music started again. The tourists cheered, and Victoria Hale continued selling access to an island she did not own. By sunset, the first phone call reached Harbor Crest. By the following morning, no one at the HOA was laughing. But what investigators found when they arrived on my beach was something Victoria would spend a very long time trying to hide. I was never the kind of person who wanted a fight with an HOA. I worked as a marine electrical technician, spending most of my days tracing failed circuits through engine rooms, repairing navigation systems, and climbing through spaces too cramped for anyone with a fear of tight corners. It was steady work, honest work, and after a long day, all I wanted was a quiet house, a small boat, and a place where nobody needed anything from me. That place was the island. My father had bought it decades earlier, back when Harbor Crest was still a scattering of modest waterfront homes instead of a gated community filled with polished stone entrances and luxury marketing signs. The island covered just under 6 acres. Most of it was sand, low brush, sea oats, and wind-bent palms. There was no mansion, no restaurant, and no commercial dock. My father had kept it that way on purpose. When I was a kid, he took me there on Saturday mornings. We fished from a weathered wooden platform, repaired storm damage after hurricanes, and planted native vegetation where the dunes had begun to thin. He taught me that owning land did not mean forcing it to become profitable. Sometimes ownership meant protecting a place from people who believed every quiet piece of nature needed a price tag. After he died, the island passed to me through a separate deed with its own parcel number, legal description, and county tax record. It was not part of Harbor Crest's common property. It was not listed as an HOA amenity. No recorded easement gave residents the right to land there, swim there, or organize events there. A few neighbors had visited over the years, but only with my permission. I sometimes allowed families to watch shorebirds or fish from the old dock. I never charged them. I never advertised the island. I simply asked them to respect the dunes and stay away during sea turtle nesting season. For years, that arrangement worked. Then, Victoria Hale became HOA president. Victoria treated Harbor Crest less like a neighborhood and more like a luxury brand she personally owned. She ordered new entrance monuments, hired a marketing consultant, renovated the clubhouse, and filled the HOA newsletter with promises about increasing property values. Every board meeting seemed to revolve around attracting wealthier buyers and making the community look more exclusive. One spring, I opened the monthly newsletter and saw an aerial photograph of my island beneath the words Harbor Crest Nature Island. I immediately emailed the board and explained that the property was privately owned. Grant Weller, the HOA operations manager, replied that the phrase was only promotional language and did not change the legal status of the land. 2 weeks later, Victoria asked whether the HOA could host a private weekend picnic there for real estate agents. I refused in writing. Sea turtle nesting season was beginning, and I did not want crowds, boats, generators, or lights near the upper beach. That should have ended the discussion. Instead, the HOA sent me a violation notice claiming the faded paint on my skiff failed to meet Harbor Crest's visual standards. The letter threatened a $100 daily fine if I did not repaint it within 10 days. My boat was stored beside my house, behind a fence, and had looked exactly the same for years. That was when I realized the notice was not about paint. It was pressure. Victoria had decided my island could help sell Harbor Crest, and she believed enough fines, warnings, and public embarrassment would eventually make me cooperate. I still did not want a war. I wanted the board to correct the newsletter, withdraw the fine, and leave the island alone. But property rights become meaningless when the owner stays silent long enough for someone else to rewrite the story. At the time, I had no idea how far Victoria had already gone. She was no longer asking for permission. She was preparing to sell access to my father's island without telling me. Before the next part, think about what you would have done in my place. Would you have paid the fine to avoid trouble, or would you have started checking every document the HOA hoped you would never read? Share your answer, and keep listening, because the first brochure I saw revealed that this was no longer a disagreement. It was a business. The brochure arrived in my mailbox on a Thursday afternoon. It was printed on thick glossy paper, the kind used for luxury resorts and high-end real estate developments. Across the front was an aerial photograph of my island, brightened until the water looked almost tropical. Beneath the image, Harbor Crest advertised a new seasonal attraction called the Island Escape Experience. The package included private boat transportation, reserved beach seating, kayak rentals, chilled drinks, family photography, and sunset access. Tickets started at $65 per person. Premium weekend packages cost nearly twice that amount. At first, I assumed it was a proposal the HOA had printed before receiving my answer. Then, I saw the opening date. The program had already been operating for 9 days. The brochure included photographs of guests sitting beneath white umbrellas on my beach. One picture showed a portable bar near the palms. 3D, AG. Another showed children climbing across the lower dunes while a Harbor Crest employee handed out life jackets. The final page thanked Coastal Leisure Partners for managing the island on behalf of the community. I drove directly to the neighborhood marina and launched my skiff. Long before I reached the island, I could see what they had done. A floating dock extended from the western shoreline. Bright flags marked a new landing area. 2 commercial pontoon boats were tied beside a row of kayaks. My private property signs had disappeared. Someone had cut a wide path through the native brush from the dock to the upper beach. Wooden stakes had been hammered into the sand to support rope barriers, but the barriers were not protecting the dunes. And fried. They were separating ordinary ticket holders from a premium seating section. A temporary rental booth stood beneath the palms. Behind it were a generator, several large coolers, stacks of folding chairs, and a portable speaker system. Near the tree line, contractors were assembling a raised platform that looked large enough for private parties or wedding ceremonies. I photographed everything before anyone noticed me. Grant Weller arrived in a utility vehicle and stopped directly in front of my boat. 2 employees followed him, while another worker continued drilling into the platform behind them. I asked Grant for the permits, the contractor's insurance information, and the document giving the HOA permission to operate on my land. He refused to provide any of them. According to Grant, Harbor Crest had historic recreational access to the island because residents had visited the surrounding water for years. He treated occasional boating near the shoreline as though it created ownership. He also claimed the HOA had received legal guidance confirming that the island fell inside what he called the community waterfront zone. That phrase appeared nowhere in my deed. It appeared nowhere in the county plat. It was language invented for marketing, repeated until the board hoped residents would mistake it for law. I told Grant the operation had to stop immediately. I gave him written notice that every guest, employee, contractor, and piece of equipment on the island was there without my permission. He took the notice, folded it once, and placed it in his pocket without reading it. The following morning, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney. It accused me of interfering with an authorized community vendor and warned that the board could fine me for disrupting an approved amenity. The letter mentioned historic access, community benefit, and implied recreational rights, but it did not include a deed, easement, court order, or signed agreement. 3 days later, the board imposed a $5,000 fine against my account. The notice claimed I had harassed contractors, frightened guests, and obstructed HOA operations. It also threatened to place a lien on my home if I failed to pay. The board scheduled a public hearing, but it was not designed to determine the truth. It was designed to make me look unreasonable in front of my neighbors. At the meeting, Victoria displayed a colored marketing map showing Harbor Crest, the marina, and my island in the same shade of blue. She presented it as though matching colors proved common ownership. Most residents had never seen the official county plat, so they had no reason to recognize the deception. The board announced that more than 1,200 tickets had already been sold for the summer. The projected revenue was large enough to help fund clubhouse renovations and reduce a planned increase in HOA dues. That changed the mood in the room. Residents who might have questioned the project began seeing my property as money that belonged to them. My objections were framed as selfishness. My deed was treated like an inconvenience. Every dollar the HOA expected to collect made it harder for the board to admit it had never possessed the right to sell access in the first place. After the meeting, Victoria approached me in the parking lot with a proposed agreement. The HOA would pay me $20,000 if I signed over seasonal access to the island and withdrew every complaint. The agreement would also require me to accept the existing dock, allow commercial tours, and waive claims for the damage already done. The offer was worth less than the revenue they expected to collect in a few busy weekends. I refused to sign. The retaliation became more aggressive, almost immediately. Someone cut the lock on my original dock. One of my visible security cameras was rotated toward the water. Fresh tire tracks appeared through a section of dune grass I had spent years protecting. Trash accumulated near the high tide line, and deep holes from umbrella poles were left uncovered across the beach. The most disturbing damage appeared near the sea turtle nesting area. A wooden marker placed by licensed volunteers had been pulled from the sand and moved behind a line of brush. The original location had been raked smooth. Lounge chairs now occupied the space where the marker had stood. The person responsible had tried to erase the evidence. They had forgotten about the second camera. Years earlier, after storms damaged the dock, I had installed a small weatherproof camera high in a tree. It was difficult to see from the ground and faced the upper beach from a different angle. That camera had recorded 2 contractors discovering the marker, contacting Grant, removing the stake, and dragging it away from the premium seating area. It also captured a utility vehicle crossing the nesting zone after dark under bright headlights. I watched the footage twice. Then, I stopped thinking about fines, board meetings, or convincing my neighbors. I copied the video onto an encrypted drive, uploaded another copy to secure cloud storage, and sent a third copy to an attorney. The HOA believed the damage had left me desperate. In reality, It had finally given me the evidence I needed to stop treating this as a neighborhood dispute and start treating it as a legal case. I did not post the video online. I did not send it to the neighborhood group, threaten Victoria, or give the HOA a chance to invent a new explanation before I understood exactly what I had. Anger might have earned me sympathy for a few days, but sympathy would not restore the dunes, remove the dock, or prove ownership in court. I needed a record that could survive lawyers. That night, I created a timeline beginning with the first newsletter that called the island a Harbor Crest amenity. I attached every email, violation notice, fine, brochure, photograph, and certified letter in chronological order. I saved screenshots of the ticketing website showing prices, available dates, premium packages, and the name of the company collecting payments. I recorded the date and time of every visit to the island. I labeled photographs by location and matched them to the parcel map. I preserved the original camera files instead of editing them into shorter clips. Each file remained on the memory card, while verified copies were stored on separate drives and in cloud storage. Then I hired Robert Chen, a licensed land surveyor who had no connection to Harbor Crest. Robert began at the county records office. He reviewed the legal description in my deed, the original subdivision plat, shoreline surveys, tax maps, and every recorded easement associated with the surrounding properties. After that, he spent 2 days on the water and the island using survey equipment and GPS coordinates to confirm the boundaries. His conclusion was simple. The entire island belonged to me. The temporary dock, rental booth, event platform, generator, lounge chair area, and kayak launch were all located inside my parcel. Harbor Crest had no recorded access easement, no ownership interest, and no legal right to operate a commercial attraction there. The so-called community waterfront zone did not exist in any official document Robert could find. He also discovered that the anchors supporting the floating dock had been installed inside a regulated shoreline area. The contractor had disturbed vegetation beyond the ordinary high water line and driven equipment through a section identified as sensitive coastal habitat. Robert prepared a signed survey, marked the improvements, photographed the encroachments, and placed new boundary markers where they could not be mistaken for decorations. While he worked, I went to the county clerk's office. I requested certified copies of my deed, my father's deed, the parcel history, tax records, subdivision plats, and every easement recorded against the property. I also asked for construction and coastal permits associated with the island, Harbor Crest, Coastal Leisure Partners, Victoria Hale, and the contractor named on the equipment. There were no permits for the dock. There were no permits for the raised platform. There were no approved plans for commercial electrical equipment, temporary sanitation facilities, nighttime events, or organized passenger service on the island. The HOA had not merely entered private property. It had built and operated there without completing the approvals that would have forced someone to verify ownership before work began. My attorney, Rachel Kim, reviewed the documents in her office. She specialized in property disputes, but she did not rush to file a lawsuit. Her first concern was preserving evidence before the HOA realized how serious the situation had become. Rachel sent formal preservation notices to Victoria, Grant, every board member, Coastal Leisure Partners, the security company, and the contractor. The notices required them to retain emails, text messages, contracts, invoices, meeting minutes, permit applications, photographs, payment records, and ticketing data. She also sent a demand letter ordering the HOA to stop all tours, remove guests and vendors, suspend construction, withdraw the fines against me, and preserve the condition of the island for inspection. The letter included Robert's preliminary findings and warned that continued entry would be treated as knowing trespass. Victoria responded by expanding the schedule. Within 48 hours, the ticketing website added sunset tours and private corporate events. The HOA newsletter announced that the program would continue despite what it described as an individual resident's attempt to interfere with community progress. That decision mattered. Before the demand letter, Victoria could still claim confusion. After receiving certified notice, every new ticket, every boat landing, and every contractor entering the island became evidence that the board knew ownership was disputed and chose to continue anyway. Rachel instructed me not to confront the workers. Instead, I documented each arrival from a lawful distance. I photographed boat registration numbers, employee uniforms, equipment labels, and the condition of the beach after each event. The hidden camera produced more than the footage of the turtle marker. It showed contractors unloading equipment before sunrise. It recorded generators running after dark and bright lights aimed toward the shoreline. It captured an employee placing trash bags behind the dunes rather than removing them. Most importantly, it recorded the exact sequence surrounding the protected nest. Two workers noticed the orange marker in the center of the premium seating area. One photographed it and made a phone call. Several minutes later, he returned with another employee. Together, they removed the stake, carried it behind the brush, raked over the original location, and arranged lounge chairs across the sand. The footage showed intention, not an accident. I contacted a local sea turtle monitoring organization and provided the date, coordinates, and photographs without sending the full video publicly. A volunteer coordinator confirmed that the marker had been placed after a documented loggerhead nesting crawl. The nest remained protected even after someone removed the visible warning. She explained that artificial lighting, vehicle traffic, heavy equipment, and concentrated beach activity could disturb nesting areas and disorient hatchlings. She also confirmed that only authorized personnel should alter official nest markers. Rachel arranged for the original footage to be copied and documented properly. We recorded the camera model, memory card information, file creation dates, and the process used to preserve each copy. Nothing was cropped, filtered, or enhanced. Then she examined the HOA's insurance disclosures. The policy contained exclusions involving intentional property damage, knowing violations, unapproved commercial operations, and certain environmental claims. That did not automatically mean the insurer would refuse everything, but it created a serious risk for the board. If Victoria continued after receiving the demand letter, Harbor Crest might be forced to pay a large portion of the loss from its own reserves. By the end of the week, I had a certified deed, a professional survey, permit records, ticket sales, photographs, untouched video files, environmental documentation, and proof that the HOA had been warned. But the most damaging evidence had not come from my camera. It was sitting inside the HOA's own email system, written by the people who already knew they had no right to be on the island. The email came from a board member named Elliot Barnes. He had served on the Harbor Crest board for nearly 4 years and had originally supported Victoria's plan to improve the neighborhood's waterfront image. But unlike Victoria, Elliot believed every project should begin with ownership records, permits, and a written legal opinion. He had asked for all three. What he received instead were excuses. Elliot contacted Rachel after the preservation notices arrived. He explained that several board decisions had been made through private email chains and informal meetings that excluded members who questioned the island project. He had saved copies because the explanations never matched the documents he was shown. The first email was dated 3 weeks before the tours began. Grant had forwarded a preliminary title search to Victoria. The report stated that Harbor Crest held no ownership interest in the island and that no recreational easement benefiting the HOA appeared in the recorded chain of title. Victoria had answered that the title issue could be resolved later. The second email came from the dock contractor. He warned that the proposed landing area appeared to fall within a regulated coastal zone and that work should not begin until the property owner signed the application and the required permits were approved. Grant responded that the HOA was acting as the authorized manager of the site. There was no authorization. The third email was even worse. A local environmental consultant had informed the board that sea turtle activity had been reported on the upper beach. The consultant recommended delaying all nighttime events, avoiding vehicle traffic, shielding artificial lights, and coordinating with an approved monitoring group before placing equipment. Victoria rejected the recommendation because the sunset tours were already being advertised. She did not misunderstand the risk. She chose the revenue. Then Rachel opened the email that changed the entire case. It had been sent the morning the workers found the orange turtle nest marker. Grant had attached a photograph showing the stake directly inside the premium seating area. He warned Victoria that the nest could force them to close the most profitable section of the beach during the busiest weekend of the season. Victoria's reply instructed him to move the marker away from the guest area and keep the schedule unchanged. The message was brief, but its meaning was impossible to hide. The HOA president had not merely failed to notice a protected nesting site. She had been shown the marker, warned about the consequences, and directed an employee to conceal the problem so ticket sales could continue. Rachel printed the email and placed it beside the video stills from my camera. The image in Grant's attachment showed the marker in its original location. The timestamp matched the camera footage. The worker's phone call matched the time Grant sent his message. Their return to the beach matched Victoria's reply. Every piece connected. That was the moment the balance of power changed. Until then, the HOA had tried to frame the dispute as one resident objecting to a community improvement. The evidence showed something entirely different. Harbor Crest had entered land it did not own. It had sold commercial access without the owner's consent. It had constructed a dock and event facilities without confirmed permits. It had continued operating after receiving a certified demand letter. It had disturbed a regulated shoreline. It had concealed a documented sea turtle nest to protect ticket revenue. And it had created written records proving that senior decision-makers understood the risks before they acted. Rachel explained that the case now involved several separate areas of liability. The property claims supported trespass, removal of the structures, restoration costs, loss of use, and potential enhanced damages because the conduct continued after formal notice. The construction records exposed the HOA and contractor to code enforcement, stop work orders, removal expenses, and penalties connected to unpermitted coastal work. The ticketing operation created contractual problems because Harbor Crest had promised Coastal Leisure Partners that it possessed the legal right to use the site. The environmental evidence created an entirely different level of scrutiny. The turtle nest did not transfer ownership of the island or automatically determine a specific fine, but the deliberate removal of the marker, combined with lights, vehicles, equipment, and commercial crowds, gave wildlife officials a reason to investigate conduct the HOA could no longer dismiss as a private disagreement. Rachel sent the new evidence to the County Environmental Office, Code Enforcement, the State Wildlife Agency, and the HOA's insurer. The insurance response arrived first. The carrier issued a reservation of rights letter. It stated that coverage had not yet been denied, but intentional acts, known trespass, unapproved commercial operations, and certain environmental violations might fall outside the policy. That letter terrified the board more than my lawsuit ever had. As long as Victoria believed the insurance company would pay for the defense and settlement, she could treat the conflict as someone else's financial problem. Now Harbor Crest faced the possibility that its own reserve funds would be used to repair the island, refund customers, defend multiple claims, and pay penalties. Coastal Leisure Partners reacted almost as quickly. Its contract required the HOA to guarantee that Harbor Crest possessed lawful authority to operate at every advertised location. When the company received the survey and title records, its attorney demanded proof of ownership. Victoria could not provide it. The company suspended future bookings, froze unpaid revenue, and began calculating refund exposure. Victoria called an emergency board meeting and tried to describe the situation as an attack built on environmental technicalities. But the meeting did not unfold the way she expected. Rachel entered carrying certified copies of the deed, Robert's signed survey, the permit search, the preservation notices, the insurance letter, and the internal emails. Each board member received a separate packet. Several of them saw the title report for the first time. 2 board members admitted they had been told that the island's access rights had already been verified. Another said he had never approved the sunset tours or the construction contract in the final form Victoria signed. Elliot requested that the project be suspended immediately. Victoria tried to delay the vote, but the evidence had already escaped her control. The insurer had it, the county had it, the wildlife investigators had it, Coastal Leisure Partners had it. My attorney had preserved it. For the first time since the ordeal began, Victoria was no longer deciding what anyone was allowed to know. By sunrise the next morning, the marina was filled with official vehicles. The personal dispute she had tried to dominate with fines and marketing language had become a formal investigation, supported by survey records, permit files, camera footage, internal emails, and a paper trail written by her own board. By 7 the next morning, the Harbor Crest Marina no longer looked like the entrance to a luxury community. A sheriff's vehicle was parked beside the boat ramp. 2 county code enforcement trucks blocked access to the commercial dock. Wildlife investigators stood near the shoreline with cameras, evidence bags, and printed maps. A county inspector was already examining the temporary electrical connections used to power the ticket booth and loading area. The first tour boat was scheduled to leave at 8. It never moved. A deputy informed the captain that no passengers could be transported to the island while ownership, permitting, and environmental violations were under active review. Coastal Leisure Partners immediately began calling customers and canceling reservations. Victoria arrived less than 20 minutes later. She came carrying a binder filled with HOA meeting minutes, marketing maps, and internal approvals. None of those documents established ownership. The county surveyor compared Robert Chin's certified survey with the official parcel records. The conclusion was the same. The island, the landing area, and every structure installed by the HOA stood inside my legally recorded property. Harbor Crest could not produce a deed. It could not produce an easement. It could not produce written permission from me. The colored map Victoria had displayed at the board meeting had no legal value at all. Code enforcement then reviewed the structures on the island. The floating dock lacked the required approval. The raised event platform had no permit. The temporary electrical setup had not been inspected. The sanitation facilities had been placed without documentation for commercial use in that location. A stop work order was posted at the marina and another was delivered to the contractor. No equipment could be removed until investigators documented the site. The wildlife team traveled to the island with me, Rachel, and the deputy. They photographed the disturbed dunes, the tire tracks, the generator location, the lighting equipment, the hidden turtle marker, and the original nesting area identified in the monitoring records. They also reviewed the camera footage. The video showed the contractors finding the marker, contacting Grant, moving it, raking the sand, and placing premium lounge chairs over the area. The timestamps matched Victoria's email instructions. That ended any serious argument that the nest had been moved by weather, tourists, or an unknown third party. Grant attempted to place responsibility on the contractor. The contractor responded by producing saved text messages, work orders, and call records showing that HOA management had directed the work. Coastal Leisure Partners did the same. Its executives provided the agreement in which Harbor Crest guaranteed that it had authority to operate on the island. Within hours, every organization involved began protecting itself from Victoria's decisions. The contractor blamed the HOA. The tour company blamed the HOA. Several board members blamed Victoria and Grant. The insurer requested additional records and warned again that intentional conduct might not be covered. Rachel filed for emergency relief using the deed, survey, permit search, video files, internal emails, and evidence of continued operations after formal notice. The court issued a temporary injunction. The order prohibited Harbor Crest, its vendors, contractors, employees, and guests from entering the island without my written permission. It suspended all commercial activity, required preservation of financial and electronic records, and allowed controlled access only for official inspection and restoration planning. The HOA was also ordered not to move the dock, platform, generator, signs, or other equipment until the site had been fully documented. That evening, Harbor Crest held another emergency meeting. This time, there were no applause lines about property values. Residents had learned that more than 1,200 tickets might need to be refunded. They had learned the insurance company might refuse part of the claim. They had learned HOA reserves could be used for legal fees, environmental restoration, and removal costs. Most importantly, they had learned the board had been warned before the tours began. Elliott presented the title report and internal emails to the membership. 2 board members stated publicly that Victoria had never shown them the documents. Another admitted the board had approved marketing expenses without being told that ownership remained unresolved. The same residents who had once treated me as an obstacle now demanded to know why their money had been risked on land the HOA did not own. Victoria could no longer control the meeting. Her marketing language had collapsed under certified records. Her fines meant nothing beside a court order. Her private assurances disappeared when inspectors asked for permits, deputies asked for access rights, and investigators asked who authorized the removal of the turtle marker. What began as an HOA dispute had now become a documented case involving trespass, unpermitted construction, commercial misrepresentation, environmental damage, contract exposure, and possible insurance exclusions. The island was finally closed to tourists. But stopping the tours was only the beginning. The next question was how much Harbor Crest would have to pay to repair the damage, refund the customers, defend the claims, and restore a beach it never had the right to use. The final cost was not one dramatic fine. It was the combined weight of every decision Victoria had made after the truth was already in front of her. Harbor Crest had to refund the unused tickets, reimburse coastal leisure partners for canceled tours and marketing expenses, remove the unpermitted dock and event platform, restore the damaged dunes, replace native vegetation, and pay for months of environmental monitoring. The HOA also covered my survey, legal fees, restoration expenses, and compensation for the commercial use of my property without permission. When the county penalties, contractor claims, insurance disputes, and settlement costs were added together, the total passed $800,000. The insurer paid only part of it. Because Victoria and Grant had continued operating after receiving written notice, several expenses were treated as the result of knowing conduct. Harbor Crest had to draw heavily from its reserve fund, and residents were warned that a special assessment might be necessary. That announcement ended Victoria's presidency. At a special membership meeting, residents voted to remove her from the board. Grant's contract was terminated soon afterward. The HOA's attorney withdrew the $5,000 fine against me, canceled the threatened lien, and issued a written statement confirming that the island was privately owned and not subject to any community access rights. Coastal Leisure Partners ended its relationship with Harbor Crest. The dock contractor faced a licensing review for beginning coastal work without verified permits or the property owner's authorization. The island itself took longer to recover. I hired a coastal restoration team to remove debris, rebuild the damaged dune edges, and replant sea oats where vehicles and foot traffic had stripped the sand bare. New signs went up, but they were smaller and simpler than the HOA's giant resort sign. Private property. Protected habitat. No public access. Months later, I received a message from the turtle monitoring volunteers. The nest had survived. Just before sunrise, dozens of hatchlings emerged from the sand and moved toward the water across the same stretch of beach where Harbor Crest had once placed its premium lounge chairs. I stood at a distance and watched them disappear into the surf. My father had always believed land did not need to make money to have value. Victoria believed the opposite, and that belief cost her the position, the project, and the control she thought she had over everyone around her. I did not win because I shouted louder at the board meeting. I won because I kept the deed, preserved the footage, hired the surveyor, followed the paper trail, and refused to let marketing language replace legal ownership. If an HOA ever claims part of your property belongs to the community, do not rely on arguments alone. Save every notice, every email, every photograph, and every official record. Comment with what you would have done in my place. Share this story with someone dealing with a property dispute, and subscribe for more cases where patience, evidence, and the law turn arrogance into consequences.